College Writing 2 Oral Report Irrationality as the Baseline by Michael Chiango. Presented April 25th, 2021. When originally thinking of topic ideas to base my writings in this semester of College Writing 2 around, my mind went to three different places. The first was that I could write about the anti-vax movement, why it exists, and the dire impacts it has on society. The second was that I could write about the American response to COVID-19, why it was so badly handled, and what the deadly results have been. The third was that I could write about the pseudo-Christian religious cult that had formed around the 45th President, Donald Trump, why it exists, and how it has affected the country. I ended up choosing the third topic, of course, but looking back on it, I can see what my three topic ideas had in common and why I was so interested in them. They all dealt with a failing in human faculties, a deficiency in rationality, and a love of ignorance. Those who reject the efficacy and safety of vaccines are not doing so because they have access to secret knowledge and are smarter than other people. They are doing so out of ignorance. In regards to the pandemic, infectious disease experts were quite clear about what needed to be done to stop the spread of the virus and save lives, but many politicians and civilians blatantly ignored these experts and treated the coronavirus like it was no worse than the seasonal flu. Those who gravitated towards Donald Trump and saw him as some sort of savior figure had clearly cast off rationality in favor of dogmatic adherence to their cult leader. Someone said something to me on an online chat forum several months ago that I have never gotten out of my head. While I can't remember the exact phrasing, the quote went something like this: "Irrationality is not the exception in humanity, it is the rule." As a species, I think we would like to envision ourselves as especially noble and brilliant, because the idea that ignorance and irrationality are the norm for humans is far too much to bear. After all, this is the species that has produced such revolutionary geniuses as Leonardo da Vinci, William Shakespeare, Albert Einstein, Carl Sagan, and Stephen Hawking. This certainly had been my mindset, though the years of 2019 and 2020 left me with much more of a pessimistic outlook. 2019 was the year when I came to the conclusion that Christianity, a religion that 2/3 of the American population profess belief in, including most of my family members, did not seem to have any basis in reality. 2020 was the year that I saw the direct political consequences of large portions of the population believing in things with no basis in reality, with tens of millions of Americans buying into Donald Trump's ridiculously unfounded claims about how the election was rigged against him with mail-in ballots. I have always naturally had the tendency to question things and try to learn as much about a subject as I can before making any rash judgments, but at the risk of sounding somewhat conceited, I think I was foolish to believe that that is the way most people would think. It seems as though there is a natural drive no human is immune to obey authority and believe whatever is suited to one's emotional needs. Good education can somewhat make up for this, but I have serious concerns about an education system that leaves 2/3 of Americans disbelieving in evolution through natural selection and 2/5 denying man-made climate change. It is actually this pessimism about the state of human and particularly American rationality that has led me to wanting to go to college to become a teacher in the first place. I want to do what I can with my efforts to fight against ignorance in society and get people, especially young people, to think more deeply and skeptically about reality to come to the right conclusions. Returning to the subject of my writing topic, though, it is clear to me that Donald Trump intentionally used this propensity for irrationality and folly in humanity to create a loyal cult of followers who would be willing to go with him to the ends of the earth and shut their senses off to the reality around them. The January 6th insurrection at the Capitol building was probably the most significant single event in my lifetime as an American, and it showed just how much of a damage a charismatic leader with a massive platform was able to deal to the institution of American democracy. Politicians being deceitful is not exactly anything new, and the archetype of the lying politician has become a cliché at this point. However, when trying to deceive the public, politicians will commonly try to base their claims on some kind of a reality, misrepresenting data or begging the question with a good enough portion of the political establishment backing them. Donald Trump's lies were so blatant, so unbelievable, having so little basis in reality, that the sheer degree to which he constantly pushed his conspiracy theories without ever backing down is unprecedented for such a major political figure. The worst part is that the extent to which Trump constantly hammered his larger-than-life conspiracy theories actually served to make people who did not support him believe that there had to be at least some kind of legitimacy behind his claims, even though there never was, and he intentionally casted doubt upon the legitimacy of American elections for his own profit. The internet has also been a very important factor in the spread of misinformation and conspiracy theories in the modern day. Once again, I used to be much more optimistic about the impact that the internet would have on society, as now people have access to thousands of times more information than was held in the Library of Alexandria at their fingertips. But the internet has actually provided a breeding ground for misinformation and conspiracies to spread much quicker than they would have otherwise. Pervasive algorithms, built upon getting as much watch time as possible, have the tendency to trap people in a filter bubble and never let them be exposed to information and viewpoints that contradict their own. In fact, studies have actually shown that false information, or fake news, spreads more quickly online than real information. This means that it was very easy for Trump supporters to not only get trapped in his cult, but also fall down the internet rabbit hole into more and more extreme conspiracy theories associated with sources sycophantic to the 45th president. The raiding of the Capitol building was hardly the extent of the negative impact Donald Trump's lies and denial of reality had on the country. In my own life, and very recently, I have had personal familial trauma to come out of his presidency. One of my aunts, who was concerned about the vaccine, contracted COVID-19 and put off going to see a doctor because she didn't think it was that serious. When she finally was convinced to go to a doctor, her blood oxygen level had nearly reached critically low levels, and she would have certainly died if she kept holding off going any longer. Thankfully, she survived, and she now treats the virus as a very serious threat and is telling everyone she knows to get vaccinated. When reality comes knocking on your own door, you are a lot less likely to turn away from it, though that is not always the case for everyone. The situation is much more dire for another one of my aunts, who is so firmly entrenched in QAnon conspiracy theories that she rejects vaccines and masks and doesn't even believe COVID-19 exists, even though she recently contracted it. She is refusing to speak to me or any other person who brings it up to her, and as of recording this, I don't even know the status of her condition. The extent to which some of Trump's supporters have completely detached themselves from reality and how far they are willing to go to protect their fragile egos is truly terrifying. While all this is incredibly disturbing and tragic, though, I cannot help but find cults and conspiracy theories very interesting. And since I find Donald Trump to be such an interesting and unique political figure, and have followed him and his presidency very closely in the past, I ultimately decided to choose his presidency and his cultish support as my main topic for the semester to write about. My proposal for the research effort was titled The Religious Cult of Donald J. Trump. In it, I pointed out how, in addition to racism, gun rights activism, and any other of the number of things that many people have claimed was the reason for Trump's 2016 presidential victory and the many events that followed, religion was a major aspect that many people were leaving out of their analysis. As someone who follows religious issues very closely and was very concerned with the intrusion of Christianity into the government during the Trump administration, I felt as though that aspect of Trump's presidency was very important to talk about. I pointed out in my paper the various ways in which Trump gave specific support to Christian conservatives, white evangelicals, and Christian nationalists. The point of my paper, however, was to show that Christians not only saw him as a useful tool for maintaining their power and influence in the halls of government, but that Trump's rhetoric was very similar to how God is portrayed in much of the Bible, leading to many Christians who have been primed by their religion to view him as some sort of savior figure to worship. My thesis for the paper was, President Trump not only utilized religiously motivated support for him to gain the immense power and influence that he did, but he has now also managed to create a new religious cult with him in the center of it. In doing research for my proposal, however, I came into a major problem. The far-right conspiracy theory known as QAnon was supposed to be a major part of my project, as it is the most extreme version of Trump-centered cultism that one will find. But I could barely find any information on it, especially not professional sources. And this is most likely due to the fact that there is a big crackdown on QAnon materials to stop the spread of misinformation, so there wouldn't be many QAnon sites for me to visit. And it is a relatively new conspiracy theory, so hardly any professional articles would be written about it. Seeing as how I couldn't get many sources about conspiracy theories supported by Trump, I needed to shift the topic of my project somewhat from its original intent. In my annotated bibliography paper, I focused much more specifically on the white Christian support for Donald Trump and how the fear and desperation over perceived loss of status by members of this demographic was the prime motivator for the abandonment of rationality and principles in support of the 45th president, and the vulnerability to baseless conspiracies. My first article, Donald Trump as the Champion of Freedom in the Discourse of the Religious Right and White Christian Conservative America, written by Chiara Migliori, hypothesized that many white Christians who voted for Donald Trump did so because they were fearful about attacks on their First Amendment rights and saw Trump as someone who could stand up for the freedom of speech and religion. My second article, Back to a White Future 1, White Religious Loss, Donald Trump and the Problem of Belonging, by Darius Hills, was about how many white evangelicals gravitated towards Trump because they were suffering from feelings of alienation, displacement, and loss in a culture that was rapidly changing, and saw Trump as an authoritarian figure capable of making things right in the world again. My third article, Making America Christian Again, Christian Nationalism and Voting for Donald Trump in the 2016 election, written by Andrew L. Whitehead, made a clear case, backed by survey data, for why Christian nationalists were so intent on making certain Donald Trump was elected, for fear of losing the image of one nation under God. My thesis for the paper was, the main takeaway is that much of Donald Trump's religiously motivated support and subsequent fervor came largely out of desperation and fear. Conservative Christians feared that the values they held dear were changing too rapidly and were desperate for a candidate who would unabashedly stick up for their values. White Christians feared losing their place as the majority in the country and were desperate for a candidate who would make them feel more secure in their standing. And Christian nationalists feared the dissolving of Christianity as an integral aspect of American public life and government, and were desperate for a candidate who could defend the power and status of their religion, regardless of its personal character. As for my final paper, of course it is not complete yet, but seeing as how I have much more freedom to write and analyze outside of just 3 professional sources, I have decided to combine the focuses of my proposal and annotated bibliography into one paper, creating the outline in my rough draft of a comprehensive view of the religious, political, and conspiratorial aspects of Donald Trump's presidency. I analyzed first historical precedents, the factors that have been brewing for the last several decades in the Republican Party that led to Donald Trump's 2016 presidential win on the backs of evangelical conservatives. Second, power versus principles and how the so-called moral majority is willing to take a consequentialist approach to preserving conservative Christian values in the country. Third, fear and anxiety, and how white Christians averse to change, holding traditional values, often perceive malicious intent in cultural shifts and are prone to buy into conspiracy theories as explanations. Fourth, Trumpism as a religious faith, once again discussing the cultish aspects of Donald Trump's support and the similarity of his rhetoric to aspects of Christianity. And finally, societal implications, where I will analyze the great harm that the phenomena of Trumpism and its related aspects have done to the country and its citizenry. My working thesis for my final paper is, whether someone believes that Donald Trump is a literal biblical savior or merely a tool used by God to carry out his grand plan, the undeniable reality, as unlikely as it may seem, is that Christianity was inherently tied to the political career and persona of Donald Trump, playing a massive role in getting Donald Trump elected into office. And Donald Trump and the evangelical leaders who supported him were very conscious of this and used the fear and anxiety of white conservative Christians in the country to seize the reins of power. Writer's block, procrastination, and lack of adequate time have been consistent challenges for me this semester and the last semester for my writing. But I feel deeply passionate about the subject matter I have chosen, and I sincerely hope that after my final paper is complete, it will serve as a stimulating and informative read that will leave the audience with things to consider that extend beyond just Donald Trump's presidency. Because while he is an incredibly unique figure to analyze, the insanity of humanity brought him to the state of prominence he obtained. Let us never be afraid to think, and let us always be afraid of those who wish us not to.